Hello and welcome to today's episode of Diplomat Couch, where we spotlight on different foreign missions work in Zimbabwe, bilateral relations, foreign policy and opportunities available for our people. My name is Osli Matsikenyeri. Tonight our topic is pan-africanism as a means to tackling poverty, developing our nations and maintaining unity. And I'm joined by Mr. Tanaka Ndongera, who is the Director of Zimbabwe Youth Champions for Agenda 2063. Welcome to Diplomatic Couch.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Tanaka, the accomplishment of various socio-economic individual challenges in Africa can be solved by achieving continent-wide solidarity through pan-Africanism. Against this background, pan-Africanism has been regarded as a vital force in the decolonization of the African continent. Would like to unpack the concept of pan-Africanism in the context of the 21st century and how it leads to economic diplomacy, and also look at some of the regional integration initiatives which are part of the legacy of pan-Africanism. So to start this off, what is pan-Africanism and why is it so important? Would you kindly unpack it for us in the context of the 21st century?
Thank you so much for having me and for coming to discuss such critical issues which affect us as a people, as a continent. So you remember that Pan-Africanism was started by the Africans who were in the diaspora with the aim of decolonizing and making sure that we have independence, unity and development on the African continent. And you remember that this concept was initiated by Henry Williams at the London Conference in 1900. And after, when he died, we saw Marcus Garvey, we saw W. Du Bois coming. And fast forward, you remember that the first president of Ghana, who was Kwame Nkrumah, came up to make sure that Pan-Africanism force come to Africa so that we can be able to achieve independence as a people, as a continent. And fast forward, you remember that by 1994, all countries in Africa were independent politically. And from there, after developing the framework of Pan-Africanism, fast forward, you remember that in 2002, the OAU, which was the Organization of African Unity, was changed its name to African Union because we realized that the Pan-Africanism which we used to politically gain our independence as a continent was now shifting so that we could have development as a continent. And now, because you remember Mama Gaddafi was the chair of the AU and it happened in South Africa, and from there it was shaping the framework of Pan-Africanism so that we can be able to achieve independence economically. And you remember that fast forward in 2013, we launched what we call the Agenda 2063, which is a 50-year development work plan to make sure that Africa should be able to meet the global standards. Africa should be a global player with influence in all aspects of life. So Pan-Africanism, now we are talking of the 21st century, Pan-Africanism is now perceived in a way that we address the poverty, we address the challenges which our people are facing in our countries. That's why you see that in 2018, our heads of states, they met in Kigali, Rwanda, to sign the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is a framework to make sure that we increase intra-African trade. And in 2021, January, it became operational so that people from the continent and beyond, they start trading. And you remember that now to date, over 45 countries have ratified the agreement. And we are seeing progress because all this is coming through the spirit of Pan-Africanism so that we can be able to address challenges, and solutions are coming from the AfCFTA and the Pan-Africanism, because we see that as a continent we have been lagging behind, but we need to up our game so that we can be able to be there where we talk of the G20, so that we can be able to put a voice as a continent so that our decisions which we are doing today, they will affect our future, and we need to make sure that we address the challenges of our people.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive description of Pan-Africanism. You touched on the evolution of Pan-Africanism from the 1900s to where it is now in the 21st century. I'll take you a little back. One of the aims of Pan-Africanism is to move from dependence. You mentioned from the change from OAU to African Union to self-reliance through economic diplomacy. So what is economic diplomacy in the context of Africa?
All right, thank you for bringing us to economic diplomacy. You remember that basically economic diplomacy is where our governments, they use the resources to make sure that they promote trade and they promote growth of the economy this can be done through bilateral engagements, bilateral trade, and you see that, for example, as Zimbabwe, we have bilateral agreements with countries like South Africa, like Botswana. All that is being done to make sure that we have to promote trade so that back here in our country, our economy is growing. So you will find that, for example, this year there was the Dubai World Expo where all countries, they were exhibiting at the expo in Dubai. And as a country, Zimbabwe, we also went there. We had our day, the Zimbabwe Day, where we are showcasing what we have, what we offer in Zimbabwe, so that we can be able to invite people who are interested in the opportunities in Zimbabwe. And that shows you that Zimbabwe is engaging in economic diplomacy, not Zimbabwe only, but other countries on the continent. And you remember just last week, there was the African Industrialization Week, which was happening in Niger, where all head of states, they were there to discuss the progress of trade in Zimbabwe. And as a country, we send a delegation there. That's economic diplomacy. And you remember that as a country, we also have economic attaches in our embassies in different countries in the world. Those economic attaches, they are there to issue economic diplomacy so that they can be able to identify opportunities where we can tap in as a country, as a people. So that's economic diplomacy for you.
Thank you very much. That will bring me to the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's one of the flagship programs of the Pan-African Agenda 2063 that you mentioned before, and the Africa we want, whose vision is to achieve a peaceful, prosperous, and integrated Africa. How does AfCFTA, is that how you shortened it?
Sure.
How does AfCFTA feed into this vision, and do you think it's achievable?
Oh, thank you so much for taking us through to the AfCFTA, which is now a topical issue on the continent and beyond. You will remember that after what I've mentioned earlier, that the Agenda 2063 was launched in 2013 at Addis Ababa, when the head of states, they were celebrating 50 years since the formation of the OAU in 1963. And the AfCFTA comes as a flagship project under Agenda 2063. And we have 15 flagship projects, and the AfCFTA is number 2. The AfCFTA is coming to make sure that we increase intra-African trade. And as I have said earlier, that in 2018, the heads of states, they met in Kigali to make sure that they sign, and now they have ratified. So now, just recently in September, there was the first guided trade initiative where selected countries, they started to trade under the AfCFTA protocols and agreement. And you see that Kenya exported coffee from Kenya to Ghana. And to see that there is progress, and the head of states and as well as the African people, they are serious about the AfCFTA addressing our challenges. You see that we now have an AfCFTA secretariat in Ghana, and which is headed by the Secretary General, which is Wamkelemene from South Africa.
Okay.
And yes.
Okay, we're still to discuss more on the African Continental Free Trade Area. I see you have a lot to unpack, but right now we'll have to take a short break. And after the break, I will also be joined by Mr. Tanatsiwa Dambuza, who is the Regional Trade Expert, African Free Trade Area and Agenda 2063 advocate, as well as a qualified political scientist and international relations expert. Hello and welcome back to our second segment of Diplomat Couch. Today we're joined by Mr. Tanaka Ndongera, who's the Director of Zimbabwe Youth Champions for Agenda 2063. And today we're discussing Pan-Africanism as a means to tackling poverty, developing our nations, and maintaining unity. And earlier on, Tanaka was just offloading Pan-Africanism and talking about the African Continental Free Trade Area, which was established in 2018, I believe, and has been dubbed the Pan-African Trade. Tanaka, to what extent is this notion true?
This notion is very true, because all this what we are doing comes back to the first discussion which we've been talking about, Pan-Africanism. So the development of the AfCFTA has been guided through Pan-Africanism so that we increase the networking of our people. You will remember that when we were still in school, we used to talk about the Cape to Cairo dream. So we are now reviving those things in the Pan-Africanism light, and we will make sure that we need to increase inter-African trade between African states. You see that when there was the Russia-Ukraine war, people started talking that we are facing challenges as a continent, there's no wheat, there were prices going up.
Cooking oil.
You see now. So people were questioning, why could we expect like wheat from Ukraine? But we as a continent with vast arable land, you remember that Zimbabwe, the breadbasket of Africa. So this is now pushing us to make sure that we increase trade between Zimbabwe and Kenya, Zimbabwe and Tanzania, so that through Pan-Africanism, through the values and the ideals which were started by the forefathers, which made sure that we are here today, we push and free movement of people. You remember that in the same year where they signed the AfCFTA, they launched the African passport, which is there to make sure that it's easy for me to go to Nigeria. I would not need a visa because we are one people guided by the Pan-Africanism vision, which is under aspiration 2 of the Agenda 2063. So you will see that definitely the AfCFTA is dubbed the Pan-African trade because it is coming through to make sure that we bring unity as a people, and it's easy for me to move my goods. For example, if a honey business in Zimbabwe, it's easy to move the honey business to Egypt, to Comoros, anywhere where I want in the continent under the AfCFTA. And we are making sure that the AfCFTA has now developed the protocol on youth and women, because youth and women, they are critical in this because they are the largest stakeholders in terms of population. And you remember that Aspiration 6 talks of Africa developing but driven within tapping the potential of the women and youth, because we are the largest. And you know that over 60% of the continent, they are young people below 35. And we need not to leave those behind because they are crucial and they need to be there.
It sounds like you're saying the AfCFTA is the solution to the problems faced by Africans, especially poverty. Is this what you are saying?
Definitely.
Okay, all right. So my next question is, the research findings by the International Trade Center indicate that most business are unaware of all this that you've been talking about. They're unaware of the AfCFTA. Why so, and what can be done to raise awareness?
You remember that for us as an organization, Zimbabwe Youth Champions for Agenda 2063, we've taken it upon ourselves to make sure that we leave no young people and not anyone behind, because that was after a realization that we are talking of this agreement, but not so many people are aware about it. So with Zimbabwe Youth Champions for Agenda 2063, Zimbabwe Institute of African Integration and other organizations, we are pushing to make sure that each and everyone is aware of this. The first port of call which we've been doing is that we've been engaging schools so that we do public lectures within universities, within secondary schools, so that when someone graduates from high school, from A level into level 1 in university, they are aware about these issues. By the time you start your level 1, you complete your 4 years at uni, you feed into the economy, into the nation, and you are aware about this issue. So we are pushing to make sure that as an organization, as individuals, we strike public and private partnerships. We also engage the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, as well as the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, so that we make our people aware about this trade. And one of the things which I applaud the Zimtrade launched what they call Eagle's Nest Incubator Program, where young people who have businesses and they have their products but they want to export, they are being empowered, nurtured, so that they can be aware about what they need to make sure that they export their products under the AfCFTA. And just last week they had awards, and a lot of young people, they were winning $10,000 because this is the future, this is the present. We need to make sure that we leave no one behind, and mostly young people and women, and even those, the small to medium enterprises, they need to be involved because, you know, they've been doing some informal trade, but they now need to see that AfCFTA is a solution to the African problems, and they need to tap out from the AfCFTA.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tanaka Ndogera, for a very comprehensive explanation on Pan-Africanism, the AfCFTA, and all the efforts that are being done by the government, by different organizations to bring awareness on this and towards the Pan-African Agenda 2063. It's been a pleasure having you. And in the next segment, we are going to be joined by Mr. Tanatsiwa Dambuza, who is a regional trade expert, African Continental Free Trade Area, and Agenda 2063 advocate, as well as a political scientist. And he's going to unpack more on Pan-Africanism and sustainable development goals and what Zimbabwe and other African countries are doing towards achieving those. Hello and welcome back to our third and final segment of Diplomat Couch. My name is Osli Matsikenyeri, and earlier on we were discussing Pan-Africanism as a means of tackling poverty, developing our nations, and maintaining unity. and we had a very comprehensive discussion on the African Continental Free Trade Area and Agenda 2063. We are joined this time by Mr. Tanatsiwa Dambuza, who is a regional trade expert and also a qualified political scientist and international relations expert. Welcome, Mr. Dambuza.
Thank you so much, Osi, for giving me this opportunity.
It's a pleasure. So what is the relationship between Pan-Africanism and Sustainable Development Goals?
As you know, Pan-Africanism is something that has a long history. We only heard about the SDGs in 2015. So Pan-Africanism talks about African solutions to African problems, or Africa for Africans. So basically these things, they synergize because we want sustainable development, and sustainable development only benefits not only the Zimbabweans or the Africans, but also everyone around the world. And we are talking about African solutions to African problems. And we have problems such as poverty in Africa. The SDGs talk about zero poverty, zero hunger. They also talk about a decent work, industrialization. This is the same idea with Pan-Africanism, because Pan-Africanism, we are talking about self-sufficiency, self-determination, economic independence between and amongst African countries. We are talking about decent work, industrialization, like what my fellow colleague said, that last week we had Africa Industrialization Week, which started in 1989. So these things, they go hand in hand, and I believe that actually the United Nations actually borrowed some of the African ideas in order to come up with the sustainable development goals that we are now implementing, and by 2030 they must be achieved.
Thank you for that. And then what is the developmental impact of Pan-Africanism on Zimbabwe and beyond?
Tanaka has been talking a lot about that because we are talking of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which seeks to bring economic independence and economic cooperation between African countries. And Zimbabwe is included. Zimbabwe is one of the countries which actually first signed and ratified the African Continental Free Trade Area because it is ready to industrialize, it is ready to benefit from the cut of import duties, from the cut of tariffs, from the removal of barriers or non-tariff barriers through the African Continental Free Trade Area. It is also a member of regional economic communities such as COMESA and SADC, which are Pan-African ideas, because these all came up because of the Addis Ababa summit in 1963, where we sat down as Africans and agreed that we need to industrialize, we need to be self-sufficient, we need to decolonize, not only to decolonize politically, but to decolonize economically. And this is beneficial to Zimbabwe because once you start taking part in intra-African trade, it means we are no longer being taken advantage of. We are no longer at the periphery, but we are coming up with our own terms and conditions in order to benefit from the Pan-African trade, which is the African Continental Free Trade Area and other regional economic blocks that we are part of as Africa.
And how does Pan-Africanism impact solidarity in Zimbabwe with Africa and the rest of the world? You've described how it impacts trade between Zimbabwe and other African countries, but how does it impact the rest of the world?
Okay, when it comes to solidarity, Zimbabwe is not only a member of the African Union, is not only a member of SADC, is not only a member of COMESA, it is a member of the United Nations. And if we go to the United Nations with the same voice, it means that our voices are going to be heard. Because the main problem is when we are going to the United Nations, we have fragmented voices. We have the Francophones, we have the Lusophones, we have the Anglophones, which were former colonies of England and so forth. And we do not have a single voice. So the Pan-Africanism idea is just to ensure that as Africans, we go wherever we go with the same voice.
Very insightful. Thank you very much. Do you think there are any other areas that are relevant to our discussion today that you might want to add on to before we close?
Oh, interesting. You know, the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is one of the areas that we are really interested in, and the Agenda 2063, which is the Africa we want. These ideas, they are not going to be successful if they are exclusive or if they do not include everyone on board. So we really need to ensure that everyone is called upon and benefit from that. Everyone is told about these ideas, because these ideas must not only be discussed in the hotels where we go and then we start talking about the Africa we want. Africa we want, who are we? Are we really Africans? Or are we really the only Africans? We really need to go everywhere and let the people know that we have the African Continental Free Trade Area. If you are a farmer, you can actually export or import products at a cheaper amount without any tariffs that can bar you from doing so. Through the African Continental Free Trade Area, you have SADC, you have the one-stop border post under COMESA. You as a farmer in the rural areas, you can benefit from this. Do this and this and this so that you can take advantage of it. And then another problem that I've seen is, in as much as we celebrate that the African Continental Free Trade Area started functioning through the Guided Trade Initiative, the GTI, I'm worried about how the days that it took, the weeks that it took to be delivered to the next country from Ghana. It took 6 good weeks to be delivered, which clearly shows that the barriers are still there, and we really need to take action. We really need to start solving those barriers in order to celebrate the success of the AfCFTA. We don't really need to just start, but we need to ensure that everything that we were promised in the document, everything that we were promised in the conferences is successful, is implemented.
You've brought in young people, women. So how does a layman like myself in the street get more information about the African Continental Free Trade Area and Agenda 2063? How do I get about getting myself involved? You know, if I want to become a Pan-African activist, how do I access that information?
Okay, interesting. As Zimbabwe Institute of African Integration, we have actually partnered with different organizations, the Zimbabwe Youth Champions for Agenda 2063. We have also partnered with Zimtrade. We have been working with ZCC in trying to bring this narrative everywhere, not only in the conferences, but everywhere. We are on social media. We've been posting this, simplifying the information so that people get to understand the nitty-gritties within these agreements, such as the African Continental Free Trade Area and Agenda 2063. But this is not enough. We really need to ensure that we go beyond that, because if the businessman does not know about the AfCFTA, what about the layman? It means that the government must also partner with us so that we get to go and enlighten people more about these issues, because without that, without awareness raising initiatives, to be honest, this is going to benefit big businesses, not laymen like me. Because if someone does not know about SADC, which was formed in 1980, COMESA, which was formed in the 2010s, it is probable that they may not know about the African Continental Free Trade Area unless we take action and enlighten people more.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tanatu Adambuza, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having you on Diplomat Couch.
Oh, thank you so much, Osi.
And would also like to thank our previous guest, Mr. Tanaka Ndongera, for such an enlightening discussion on Pan-Africanism and the opportunities that are available and what the African Continental Free Trade Area and Agenda 2063 is advocating in tackling poverty, developing our nations, and maintaining unity. It's been a pleasure being with you on Diplomat Couch today. Until next episode, good day.